Game over, man. Game over. Johnny, you're gonna need a bigger boat. Why so serious?
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for April 7th, 2025, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody. They picked a hell of a spring to release hell of a summer.
I was going to say, up here in the Northeast, we just got done with a hell of a winter. Now we're in the middle of a hell of a spring. I guess
I know
Hollywood is assuming we're going to have a hell of a summer. So maybe this movie is predictive of a good summer season? I don't know.
I mean,
maybe.
It's been one hell of a 2025 already. We'll just say that. It was all kinds of chaos today here in the United States. And yeah, I mean, I think it's just going to be one hell of a next 4 years. So,
it's one hell of an American time.
Yeah, exactly. I am excited to get into this one, though. It is interesting, right? Because we're talking about a little horror film that was made for just $3 million. It is co-directed by Finn Wolfhard and Billy Bryk, two names that you might recognize, especially Finn Wolfhard, who's most famous from his days with Stranger Things.
Yeah.
They co-directed this movie, and it does stem back to their time on Ghostbusters Afterlife. It's where they met on the set of that film. They wrote this screenplay together back in 2019.
Yeah.
They wanted to pursue this as soon as 2020. Of course, the pandemic hit at that time, and they had to wait until around 2022. And at that time, Finn Wolfhard was just 22 years old. So he wanted to pursue this when he was just 19 and 20, which is kind of crazy.
Given the material, that actually
Hollywood
makes more sense. That makes more sense that this came from the mind of a bunch of late teenagers as opposed to 20-somethings, as I'm sure we'll talk about.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. There is surprisingly lots to talk about with this film, whether it works or whether it doesn't. And the film has gotten lots of mixed reviews, and I can understand why. We'll certainly get into its weaknesses and its flaws as well as its strengths. But I do find that fascinating that you have a 19 and 20-year-old that wrote this screenplay, tried to get financing. They were able to secure financing in 2022 and were able to develop this film. And not only did they co-direct, they were producers on this, and then they brought on Fred Hechinger, who stars in this film. He also came on as a producer. So this became a project with these young actors who are writing the film, they're acting in the film, they're directing the film, and producing this film. So they're garnering a lot of experience. And who's to say? Maybe they'll be this generation's Seth Rogen, Jonah Hill gang.
And maybe Evan Goldberg, I guess, could be part of that as well. I could see them maybe doing these nostalgic horror trip-like movies with a bit of a comedic bite to them. I could certainly see them going that route even more so. Based on this movie, I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to that. I'll just simply say that.
I wouldn't be opposed to it either. Now, this isn't as successful as something like Knocked Up, for example, or those comedies of the 2000s with the Jonah Hill, Seth Rogen.
Right. The Judd Apatow produced movies they were so hot for like almost a decade's time.
A decade, really.
And not all of them were made by Judd Apatow, but they were all essentially produced by him. You had obviously movies that he directed, like Knocked Up and The 40-Year-Old Virgin, but then you also had Superbad. You had Forgetting Sarah Marshall.
Superbad is another big one.
Countless others. But and you could tell that the comedic edge to this movie, Hell of a Summer, it's not too far off from that kind of comedic edge that we saw in the late 2000s.
No. I mean, it is. It's not going for the same crassness as those films. Obviously, they're taking a very different route tonally and genre-wise.
Yeah.
But equally, you have a young group that feels inspired and they want to make movies on their own.
It's similarly immature, I'll simply say.
For sure. Yeah, there is an immaturity to it
Yeah.
that you would expect. There's no doubt about that. Before we get into it, though, I just also want to get this off my chest now. I'm going to get this out of the way.
I know where you're going with this. Thank you for doing this now, so you don't keep interrupting my thoughts with the movie. It just gets too distracting.
Yeah, I don't want to bog down the conversation, but I have to get it off my chest. For longtime listeners, or even if you've just been with us for the last year or so, you'll know where I'm going with this. But for new listeners, some context. I have been a champion of a big proponent that Fred Hechinger is a time traveler. I think he is young Joaquin Phoenix who has traveled back in time to live with us in this day and age. Because I think those two, Hechinger and Joaquin Phoenix, I think they're doppelgangers.
I still
just
don't
different
see it.
ages.
I still don't see it.
The mannerisms, the way he speaks, the way he talks, I just feel like they are the same exact person. And for me, I don't like. I can't unsee it. It's all that I see. And look, I say that complimentary. That's not a bad thing by any stretch of the imagination. I love Joaquin Phoenix when he is inspired and not being an asshole and leaving the set when you're 2 days away from shooting a film. Poor Todd Haynes.
Different conversation. Yeah.
Yeah. When Joaquin Phoenix is doing the right thing, he is a great actor. And I've always loved Joaquin Phoenix. For a time, especially in the early 2010s, I don't know if there was anyone doing it better than Joaquin Phoenix.
He's one of the greatest actors of our generation. Certainly one of the more interesting ones. Too.
Fantastic. So if you're going to look to someone for inspiration, artistically speaking, not necessarily personally speaking, although when you name your child after your dead brother, it's not all bad. It's not all bad.
How did that never become an In Session Film t-shirt, JD?
They
named him River.
They named that, I'm glad that you said that because there are lots of In Session Film things that I have not made into shirts yet. That's one of them.
That's a perfect
keep
one.
reminding me of that. It's going to be one of the next ones.
We'll just call this the name. They named him River podcast going forward.
They named him River. Yeah, that's a great gag. Check out the In Session Film archives for that. But that is to say, if you're going to look to someone for inspiration, I think Joaquin Phoenix is a great example, especially if you have similar vocal intuitions and patterns and all that sort of stuff. So I say that very complimentary, but yeah, they are the same person as far as I'm concerned in that regard.
Yeah,
and
okay.
I love that I get vindication on this when Ridley Scott clearly saw the same things and hired Hechinger to be the Joaquin Phoenix in the last
I guess that's
Gladiator
true.
movie.
If we know anything, Ridley Scott's the smartest person alive.
And he's one of the best. Yeah, exactly. Do love that.
I still don't quite see the similarities as much, but I feel like you are not the only one making these comparisons. I think I'm starting to see it more often, which makes me think, am I just simply missing something? And were
I think
you just
are,
ahead?
man.
I think you may have just been ahead of the curve here, man.
I look, I think I was the first one. I've been saying this for at least a year and a half now.
Oh, longer than that. I think you said this
2 years.
back. I think you said this back when we reviewed what was that Joe Wright film with Amy Adams, Woman in the Window? I think you were even saying it back then.
Yeah, it's been a while. It's been quite a few years.
Yeah.
Yeah. The first time I saw him on screen, that's all that I saw was Joaquin Phoenix. Like he has a similar look and thing about him. That I love that I say that very complimentary.
This is hilarious.
And yeah, I mean, it is so vivid to me. So vivid. And with Hell of a Summer, I say all that to say with Hell of a Summer, there were moments in this film where I was laughing hysterically to myself. I was trying not to be distracting to everyone around me who's trying to enjoy this film without that context because they don't know what I'm thinking, obviously, or what I'm laughing at.
Sure.
And it's, whether the moment calls for heavy laughter or not, sometimes it didn't, but I saw those. I saw the mimicry and I was laughing so hard. Like this was the most Joaquin Phoenix I feel like I've seen out of all the movies was this one.
Let me give you this, and maybe this is because I'm starting to look for those Joaquin Phoenix similarities because of how much you are talking about this. But there is a particular moment in Hell of a Summer where Fred Heschinger as Jason has a freak out moment where he's discovering these dead bodies for the first time.
Yes.
And when I saw that freak out, my first thought was, okay, maybe he's channeling his inner Beau is Afraid for this one.
Yeah, I absolutely sensed it. In fact, when he did that freak out moment, it was reminiscent to me of the Saturday Night Live movie from last year when we were talking about the stairwell sequence.
Oh, with Cooper Hoffman.
Seymour Hoffman coming through his son in that moment. We were all like having this out of body experience.
Yeah.
And that's his son. That's an actual blood relative. So it makes
not quite the same
a lot of sense there. It's not quite the same. I get it. But I would argue that the similarities are just as heavy here. Not everyone is catching on to it as quickly as I am. But I'm telling you, if you look at it specifically and you pretend that is Joaquin Phoenix, a young Joaquin Phoenix, obviously, you're like, holy shit, that is the same person. Especially in that moment.
I'll in that particular moment, I will say I did sense it more than I ever have. And perhaps that is because I was looking for it. I am looking for it more, but I did kind of sense like the jail scene from The Master. I did kind of sense a little bit of that same energy there. That freak out energy was
at
the very least you can tell where Fred Heschinger was maybe pulling his influences from. I'll simply say.
Yeah, and I don't know if he is aware of it or if anyone has said anything to him or not. It is most likely just pure coincidence. I don't know. But I like if you told me they were related, I would wholeheartedly believe it.
You believe it at this point? Yeah. Okay.
I would wholeheartedly believe it. Long lost cousins. Maybe he's an uncle. I don't know. But to me, they're like the same person. And I love it. I absolutely love it. And in all transparency, it did amplify this experience for me a little bit.
Whether that was intentional of the film or not.
No. I mean, I'm not
sure. Yeah, I'm not sure if Billy Bryk and Finn Wolfhard were thinking about Joaquin Phoenix while making this movie.
Not at all.
But if it increased your enjoyment, I guess that means the movie's still doing something right.
No, yeah. Look, Heschinger is a great young actor who will continue to have a wonderful career.
Yeah.
Assuming that he stays out of trouble, all that sort of stuff.
And doesn't, leave sets before the movies are beginning to shoot.
Yeah, doesn't leave sets 2 days before you're supposed to shoot. He is a great, great talent, and he'll be able to separate himself from Joaquin Phoenix. There's no doubt about it. But that connection will always be there for me. And honestly, I look forward to seeing where his career goes next and how that only begins to manifest itself further. I love it. Anytime he's in a movie, I get giddy. He's just one of my new favorites now.
He's very exciting. He's a very exciting and interesting on-screen presence. I'm with you. I'm very excited to see him, continue this this acting trajectory he's on.
Yeah. Especially in movies like this, I will say, depending on the movie, I can really subdue that. Like, for example, Nickel Boys had nothing to do with Heschinger, his performance. Like, he was not carrying that movie by any stretch of the imagination. And there was so much more going on with that film that it was the last thing on my mind. So like in performances like that and movies like that, where it requires your focus to be on more important things. Yes.
Yeah.
But well, I can separate those things, but
this movie is the opposite. This movie wants you to focus solely on Fred Heschinger.
Exactly. And man, that's all I saw throughout this film was a young Joaquin Phoenix, and I had the time of my life. I had a ball with that. All right. I think with that laid out, we can get into the film itself.
The actual film, and not just the Joaquin Phoenix of it all.
Exactly. Hell of a Summer. As we noted, this is directed by Finn Wolfhard and Billy Bryk, who also star in this film alongside, as we noted, Joaquin Phoenix Jr., aka Fred Heschinger, as well as Abby Quinn, DeFaro Wunutai, Pardius Saremi, Rosebud Baker, Adam Pally has a small little cameo here as well. If you are not familiar with Hell of a Summer, the counselors of a summer camp are terrorized by a masked killer. That's it. That's all the synopsis is. And
it
look,
has a little fun
gets
with
to
it.
the point pretty succinctly.
The movie does as well, which I guess that plot is very appropriate then.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty much all this is. It is counselors at a summer camp before all of the kids arrive.
Yeah.
And they are terrorized by a masked killer. Yeah, that's pretty much all this is. So, all right. Brendan, what did you think about Hell of a Summer?
I had a good time with it. It sort of reminded me of the film Hard Eyes from earlier this year, JD, which we both ended up saying was a very successful romantic comedy, but maybe not a very successful horror slasher film. And I feel like I could say the same thing about Hell of a Summer. I think it's decent enough as a slasher, but where I found it more enjoyable was as a summer camp comedy about growing up, specifically, which Finn Wolfhard and Billy Bryk kind of utilized this movie as a way of growing up past their nostalgia prime, if you will. They were very much tied to Ghostbusters Afterlife, as you mentioned earlier, but also given Finn Wolfhard's experience with Stranger Things, which is a show that's very deeped in nostalgia. That show is all about nostalgia. This is a movie that's kind of playing with that, but also trying to move past that. So the movie is about growing up in that way, but it's also about the generational divide between teens and 20-somethings, as this movie is very intrigued on. I think it's really interested in that particular idea. And I think the characters themselves have pretty colorful personalities. Some of them are very annoying, but they're also kind of funny. So I did laugh quite a bit at this. And at the center of it, we spent a good almost 10 minutes talking about Fred Heschinger as a Joaquin Phoenix clone. But the reason why we did that is because he is quite terrific in this. This might actually be my favorite performance of his thus far. As someone that has to carry this, and of course his name is Jason, he does a great job carrying this movie and really driving home that idea of what it means to still be tied to your childhood and not feeling like you're ready to grow up from that. So I think he taps into that very well. I think he's very funny. I think he's very charming. So really holds this movie together in something that I think overall I had a good time with. I thought it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed this for what it was as well. And I don't know if it's because I see this differently than a lot of other critics out there, because as we noted, this is getting very mixed reviews, but I don't think this film was there's not an ounce of seriousness to this film at all. Like at all. As a horror comedy, it is obviously paying homage to the slasher genre, and it is doing it brazenly. Yeah. Very, very brazenly, all the way down to its lead characters named Jason. You have a lot of stock characters that are famous in these kind of slasher films, and we can talk further about that as well. The killer, the tropes involved with the killer there is nothing new to this film in that regard. But even in terms of the technical craft here, particularly the editing of this film, and I don't know if it was a budget thing or if it was a creative choice, but the editing does a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of the thrills.
Very comedically choppy. Like it knows how choppy that it is.
It is comedic in nature for sure, but also it is attempting to subvert the jump scare in the sense that it'll cut away from a scare or a kill to something else entirely. And that's obviously an old school technique that's been around since the beginning of time. But that doesn't feel like a derivative trick here as much as I think it wants to show reverence to those who came before it. And I think that works in execution for the most part, at least up until the reveal of who the killer is. That unveiling is maybe a little underwhelming as a horror film, but the allegory underneath on that too. The allegory underneath is kind of funny. I don't think it's insightful by any means, but it's a fun joke that makes fun of TikTok culture. And honestly, It's a culture that is so insane that what unfolds in this film is probably not hyperbole. There's a non-zero chance that someone would do that in real life with the same motives in mind. I would not be surprised if that is
The fact that it's
that
not zero is the scariest thing on earth right now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I think what's most interesting here, and I totally agree with you, it's that this is a movie about outgrowing your joys from adolescence and how saddening that is on a deeply personal level. It's something that is perhaps easy to make fun of, and the film is very much aware of that, as we see Jason being mocked quite a bit in those early scenes about being back at summer camp, even though he's 24 years old and he should move on with his life. But his identity is tied to Pineway, which is the name of the summer camp, and his experiences there. He doesn't want to leave his adolescence behind. And I think that's a heartbreaking notion. Being a kid is the best part of your life. I've talked about that a lot
relatable. It's
on the
relatable.
show, and I think there's a lot of relatability to that. It's something that I do think is effective here because, one, to your point, Fred Heschinger is really, really good. His performance, genuinely, all jokes aside, is really quite fantastic. But also, and I agree with you here as well, I love the meta component of that in relation to Finn Wolfhard, who we all know from Stranger Things, as you pointed out.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it was purposeful or not. It's hard to not see it as intentional, but this probably was some sort of catharsis for him in grappling with the idea of moving past his quote-unquote Camp Pineway, if you will, in Stranger Things. As we noted, he's 22 in real life. That's quite close to Jason's age in this film. And that part of his life is now behind him. Even if he wants to go back there, he now has to move on. And again, I don't think the film is necessarily profound in those ideas here, but they're playful enough, and there's enough sincerity that is tapped into with the performances, especially by the end of the film, that I did find myself gravitating toward how the film manifests those themes here.
Yeah, and it's a very relatable idea, right? I think all of us, if we especially enjoyed our time, let's say going to college, for instance, and we get to that point of graduation, we feel like we don't want to leave, right? Even though we know we have to. And Fred Heschinger, who plays Jason here, it's established that he is basically torn between going back to Camp Pineway or going into law school. Or at least working for this law firm, I think. He's trying to become a lawyer. That's his serious career aspiration. But he's kind of running from that. He's running from that sense of responsibility that a 20-something at that time should be at least considering. And I like the interplay between these counselors that are much younger than him, even though, ironically, they're not that much younger than him. But it goes to show, and maybe this is why the film's conclusion addressing TikTok culture is so crucial here, because it showcases that even despite that small age gap, there is still quite a generational divide between these counselors and Jason. And I thought that was at least pretty interesting. And I think all these performances tap into that very well. And Fred Heschinger is quite terrific. Like I said, this might be my favorite performance of his up until this point, which is saying a lot. I think he is quite good. But really, everyone here is quite entertaining to watch. The one that really stood out to me the most outside of Fred Heschinger was actually Billy Bryk himself as Bobby, who is perhaps the closest to the closest to becoming the most aggravating character in the movie, to the point that he's almost insufferable, but he's kind of charming at it. And that's kind of a difficult thing to pull off, to be able to straddle that line between insufferability but still wanting to watch and root for this guy. It's a really good balancing act there.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting about this cast and these group of characters, one circles back to what we were saying earlier in terms of this wanting to be an homage to the slasher genre, because all of these characters in one way or another are extremely caricature-ish.
Yeah.
They embrace the horror roles, for better or worse, that we often see in these movies.
Sure.
Bobby, to me, is the 80s teenager that you want to punch in the face. I mentioned this a little bit with our Death of a Unicorn conversation in the sense that so much of the horror genre is reliant on you ironically rooting for Freddy Krueger or Jason to kill these teenagers because you find them so grating. That is who Bobby is here. He is the embodiment of that. But he does it so well. Billy Bryk does that so well in terms of playing up the rough around the edges elements of Bobby, if you
Also,
will. But
not
he's
the
also
most
charming and funny.
intelligent one of the group as well.
Not intelligent at all. Absolutely not. Then you have Demi, who is the TikTok influencer here. So that is a more modern, I guess, evolution of the slasher genre, but still very caricature-ish in execution. You have, which one is you have the gay artist, the character that loves to put on the play. And
is that Ezra, played by Matthew Finlan, I think it is?
Yeah. And then you have your goth, I want to speak to spirits character. And, you know, she really hams that up as well.
You have a vegan as well.
Yeah. So these characters are not...
They're stock.
Nuanced.
They're stock. Yeah.
They're very stock. But the film, and this is where I just simply disagree from a lot of the critics out there, I think that is done very purposefully. I don't think that is lazy. I don't think that's a lack of imagination. I don't think that's just derivative for derivative's sake. And I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But there's such a deep playfulness to this film and a deep sincerity, not just toward its ideas or its meta component for Wolfhard, but this film is in a love affair with this genre and is wanting to lovingly pay homage. So they're playing up these roles and playing up these stereotypes in an intentional way to have fun. That's what it's doing. And I don't see that as a bad thing. Like, I don't see that necessarily as a criticism. It's because it's not derivative and we're blind to it. It's a film that is very self-aware.
I think there's a particular word I'm going to say that we never like to say when it comes to talking about horror movies, and you might know where I'm going with this, but I think calling horror movies quote unquote elevated has kind of killed the genre. And this is not a movie that's trying to elevate above these tropes. It's trying to just simply relish in them while still having that deep-rooted sincerity as to why Finn Wolfhard and Billy Bryk wanted to make it in the first place. Yeah, it's really more playful in that regard, but it's also really funny. There are moments here, there are exchanges of dialogue here that I wouldn't necessarily call creative, but I laughed. There's an exchange between Bobby and who's the vegan girl, Miley, I believe her name is, played by Julia Doyle. He's simply trying to hit on her, so he decides to join her in eating a tofu burger. And of course, he hates it, so he throws it in the woods. So when this killer starts to attack, his immediate assumption is that, oh, a bear must have tried it and wanted the real thing now, and that's why it's attacking us. So then someone asks him, "What do you think burgers are made of?" This is more farcical than anything else.
It is. Yeah. No, I agree.
I tend to like that.
No, that's a really great point. I love that moment as well. And Miley is another one of those characters that we could bring up in terms of her being the designated vegan here and how stocky that is. Or, as I noted earlier, the psychic Noelle, I believe is her name.
Yeah. I mean, one of the characters here is an aspiring screenwriter, for crying out loud.
Yes, and it's exactly. So, like, this film is very intentionally hitting all of those points, but doing it in a fun and playful way, which is what I really like about the cast, what I love about the writing of the film, how immature it is, but there is a subtle cleverness to it at times. You know, even with Wolfhard's Chris character, there's a gag throughout this film where he's trying to hook up with one of the girls, and he's having some success early on, and then at one point it slips out of his mouth, "I love you," which they jokingly
kind of
call
adorable.
out later on
it's
in the
kind
film.
of adorable.
But they call out how insane that is, because we just met and we're just having this summer fling or whatever the case is. So this is a film that is self-aware. Now, whether that works for you or not, totally different story. I can understand why you might not be compelled by that with this film, but I do appreciate that self-awareness. I do love that it's just wanting to have fun paying homage. There is nothing new here. There is nothing insightful, but by playfully leaning into those cliches and just having fun with it, it does give credence to its sincerity when it is tapping into its themes of adolescence and letting go, and how that relates not just to this film in a vacuum, but as we noted earlier with Wolfhard and his own experiences with Stranger Things, and how that correlates to a lot of our lives in many regards. So I do love that here, and that's why the performances I think are really important, and each one of them do a great job of playing up their particular stereotype. And to your point about Heschinger, man, live. I mean, this, as silly as this film is, I really do agree with you that this is probably his best performance today, at least on the film side. I haven't seen some of his TV work, but on the film end of things, I mean, he's so good here. He's so good at playing up how much of a goof Jason is. But what I love about Jason is that he wants to be the leader. He wants to really relish being at the summer camp. It's something that obviously means a lot to him. He wants to participate. He wants to create these games for everyone to.
It's so sweet. It's so sweet.
It's very sweet. It's charming. It's naive in a way, but he's not totally clueless either. Like he does recognize that he is isolated in that regard, but that's what plays into the heartbreak of the character, because again, he doesn't want this to end. So he leans into that isolation. He leans into being the goofy leader of the camp.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't want to grow up. And Heschinger, he rides that line of goofiness and sincerity so perfectly. It is incredible how he threads that needle here.
He's so awkward, but he knows not to cross that line of awkwardness to the point that the character just becomes uncomfortable to watch. And that's also a hard thing to pull off. So it is actually a very tricky performance, and that's why I'm with you. I do think it is, in many ways, like it's kind of an underappreciated attribute with this movie is his performance and how clever and smart that it is. And because it does bring a level of relatability to it, like we've talked about. And I think a lot of the performances here do the same thing for varying reasons, but I think he's probably the most crucial in that. And I also think he does have good chemistry with Claire, played by Abby Quinn. I think they have some really touching sequences together, really especially towards the back half. I will agree with something you said earlier. And I don't know if we want to get into this yet, but it sounds like you might have another point that you want to highlight. I do think the final reveal is pretty underwhelming. I think that really is the biggest problem with the movie as far as who the killer is. And I think that's because the movie sort of set itself up incorrectly, and maybe it's more of an execution thing because of how much it's playing with homage and allusions to other horror films. The fact that Fred Heschinger is playing a character named Jason, and the only other character we see in this movie outside of the counselors is his mother in one scene. Of course, you might immediately think this is going to follow the same trajectory as the original Friday the 13th, where Jason's mother was the killer. It doesn't do that. I'll simply say that. But because I was thinking about that, I'm glad the movie went in a direction that I didn't really see coming narratively, but I think it sort of shot itself in the foot because I think it was maybe playing with those expectations a little bit too close to the chest, that there was nowhere to go but kind of down afterwards. Even if I don't necessarily dislike the generational themes at play with regard to who the killer is and why.
Yeah.
But the reveal itself, the execution of it, I think it gets too distracted in its homage to make something of its own thing out of it. And that's really the only criticism I have about it.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's underwhelming, but only as a horror film, as a slasher, because the reveals come and it's not necessarily too surprising. It also feels like it comes out of left field, and
it's kind of random. It just sort of happens.
Yeah, it feels kind of random.
And you miss it. Yeah,
exactly. But as I noted earlier, I think it works really well comedically. And
where it goes afterwards, some of the sequences after that reveal, I think, are pretty funny.
Yeah, because there comes a point in the film, without getting into too many details here, where the other counselors accuse Jason of being the killer. Now, as we just talked about with Heschinger's performance, it's very clear that he would not have any clue as to how to even attempt to pull off the kills that we see in this film. And also, we see early on that he is so genuinely devoted to this summer camp that it's an insane notion that he would be the killer. But that is the joke. That is ultimately the joke, is that the other counselors, they fail to see that because they don't really recognize Jason as being on the same level as them. They separate themselves from Jason throughout a lot of this film. So they're not able to see in him what we as the audience see in Jason. So they accuse him of being the killer. That leads to some buffoonery throughout the film, and it leads to this side adventure with Claire and Jason that I'll just leave there for spoiler reasons. However, when the reveal comes, again, as underwhelming as it is as a horror film, comedically, there are still some fun jokes to be had given the conversations that Jason ultimately has with said villain. I did find myself chuckling at, again, just the chaos of it all and the jokes, the pointing the finger at TikTok culture. Not that the film is doing that literally, but in terms of commentary, we as the audience certainly recognize that. And as I said earlier, I don't know if the film goes far enough in it. If maybe that's the criticism, because
that's a fair point.
I could see a person doing this in real life. Like, we live in a world right now where satire cannot outdo reality, just generally speaking. And this is one of those circumstances. But on a comedic side, I thought it was playful. I thought it was fun. And of course, the performances do a great job of tapping into it further.
Maybe it just needed to be edgier in order to drive that point a little bit home and actually not even have more fun with it, but be a bit crass with it. Because there is a bit of a crassness to the sense of humor here. It is kind of immature, but I wouldn't say it goes that hard as you might expect. I feel like maybe this is the opportunity where the film could have been a little bit more mean-spirited, honestly. And maybe it could have been a welcome tonal shift. Not saying the movie had to go that direction. We obviously don't want to critique this movie based on what we would have preferred to see. It's not our movie, after all. But I think that maybe could have been an avenue to, separate those themes out a little bit further and add more of a not necessarily unique spin, but make it stand out from the consistent tone that this movie is carrying throughout its entire runtime. But yeah, maybe it could have just gone a little harder with it.
Well, and I think that's fair. I guess it really comes down to what Bryk and Wolfhard wanted this film to be, because as we've been talking about, and I see this as a positive for the film, that it's a film that just wants to have fun paying homage. That is ultimately all that it's trying to do. Now, does it have some thematic layers to it that it treats sincerely? Of course it does, which we've been talking about as well. But ultimately, this is a film that just wants to be playful with its stereotypes and its tropes and lean into the genre of it all.
Sure.
Could it have picked a lane and went with that in an edgier way, to your point? Perhaps. And that probably would have made for, if you want to call it a better experience, to improve the quality of the film, so to speak. And you're probably right about that. But given what this film is ultimately trying to do, I do love that it doesn't overplay its hand in terms of the reveal of who the antagonist is.
And that's true.
And it just wants to, it doesn't want to be a serious commentary on TikTok culture. It doesn't. That is not the goal of this film.
We live in that world right now. We pretty much, if we're on TikTok or we're on Twitter, we're basically living those themes anyway. We don't need a movie to tell us that or to explain it any further. So you make a good point there.
Which is why I'm perfectly okay with the film just simply pointing a finger and being, haha, isn't this so dumb and stupid? Which is ultimately all that is all that it's doing. And I was perfectly fine with that on a comedic level, especially when you couple it with really the beating heart of those final scenes between Jason and Claire. And that's what I wanted to circle back to. And it worked out really well here, talking about the ending of the film, because there comes a moment, we get to the climax of the film between the killer and Jason and Claire. There's a showdown, as you would expect. And it points back, it references a scene between Jason and Claire earlier as it relates to a weapon of choice that they were bonding over earlier in the film. And as Jason is sitting there in the chair and he's subtly, cleverly speaking very specific verbiage to her that feels organic to the moment from the perspective of the killer, but to Claire, they are directives, and she is aware of that. And I love the cleverness and the fun of that.
It's cathartic. It's pretty cathartic. Yeah.
And that's ultimately what makes it work for me more than anything else. The cleverness in terms of its callback, you can debate that all day, whether that works for you or not.
It's not the most detailed of things, but there's an emotional conviction to it.
It's the emotional conviction of it, right? Because as Jason is speaking the words, there are dramatic stakes to those words, given that he's in a dire circumstance and is needing Claire to help him escape said circumstance. However, as he's speaking those words, simultaneously, he is also talking to himself. And the emotional catharsis of that in Heschinger's performance, and you get that great close-up of him as he's talking about pushing forward and moving on. Incredible. Like stuff. The close-up there, the acting, the performance there is stellar. Like almost too good for this film kind of stuff. But it's so good. Like it's really, really good. And that's what makes it work. So for me, it's the playfulness, it's the comedic backbone of the film. Heschinger's performance, again, the sincerity that he brings to those themes, that more than makes up for how underwhelming it ultimately ends up being as a slasher, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. I do wonder how the movie would have worked had it not been for these performances. If this just happened to be casted differently and those performances weren't as strong as what we actually got here, in particular with Fred Heschinger, this movie really does suffer. This really is a very successful performative piece more than anything else.
No, I agree. Like Heschinger has to work for this film to work for anybody. I think it has to start there. Obviously, he's carrying the film. You need your lead to be really good. And probably his dynamic with Claire, that's helpful as well.
That has to be good. I
key
think
performance here, aside from those two, I think is Billy Bryk as Bobby.
I agree. I was just going to say, I think out of anyone in this movie that really needs to work, it's obviously Fred Heschinger, it's obviously Abby Quinn, but I think both Finn Wolfhard and Billy Bryk are the other two that also need to work. I think their dynamic as well is really quite fun and playful. Their bickering, their jealousy, their sort of competitive spirit with one another, I think is really great. And the fact that they directed and wrote this movie together, I think makes that even funnier. But I think Billy Bryk is probably even more of a highlight, given the fact that he is the token 80s slasher victim that you just want to see die.
Yeah.
But then it gets to a point where you don't want to see him die.
Exactly.
And I love that.
Which is why I would argue him more so than Wolfhard. For me, Wolfhard, his inclusion in this film, like where I find him most vital to this is as a writer and director.
That's fair.
The meta component of him writing these themes, how that relates to him specifically, as we talked about earlier, I think that's ultimately where he has the biggest impact here. Chris, as a character, if the jokes don't land for you, it doesn't necessarily ruin the movie.
No,
Bobby,
he's not as crucial. Yeah, Bobby needs to land.
That's got to land, because there is a sophistication to that performance, which is why I really wanted to call out Bryk here, because he has to make you want to punch him in the face like an 80s teenager in these films. But he does come around. Like, there is an evolution in the character. And if that doesn't work, then a lot of the film, especially in the back half, just it feels a lot more fleeting, I guess.
Sure.
But I would argue that it does work. Like, he's
I think
really
he works.
good.
I think he's really quite great here. I was kind of surprised by that.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else? Any final thoughts?
There is a Spider-Man 2 joke in this movie that made me laugh so hard, where I think they're talking about a sexual act specifically that took place during the entire runtime of Spider-Man 2, and someone said, wait, that's like 2 hours, and then someone replied by saying like 2 hours and 7 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that was good.
So it's not really a joke on Spider-Man 2. It's just simply a joke on the length of that particular movie.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that was a good joke.
But
I mean,
anyway,
there's a lot of good individual jokes that I really liked here.
It's a funny movie. Yeah.
It is a funny movie. Like, I enjoyed myself. Again, the film is what it is. It's like, I hate to phrase it that way, but it's not trying to be anything sophisticated. And it is probably going to be underwhelming to those who are looking forward to this as a slasher. And I get that.
Yeah.
I totally get that.
There's another joke around a particular character having a nut allergy, and someone is eating, I think, either like a nut bar or eating something with peanut butter across the way. And that person said, like, that's like the equivalent of pointing a gun at me that only has 1 bullet instead of 6. And like, it's remotely not the same thing. And goes, you're right, it's not the same. It's just a nut allergy. Enjoy your privilege or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's I wouldn't call it clever, to your point, but it's funny. It's funny.
Yeah. No, like,
at least
that
we thought
moment,
it was funny.
Yeah, that moment I thought was great. I will say the knife in the peanut butter moment was maybe a little unnecessary.
Sure.
Like again, that's where and maybe that I should criticize the film a little bit more, because we've been talking about how this wants to pay homage to the slasher genre and it wants to be playful and fun. And that is the most underwhelming element of the film. Like, that kill, that didn't amuse me as much as the moment you're talking about, which is why, again, I go back to, it's better as a comedy than it is as a horror film.
Yeah.
Like, that moment I thought was a little,
that builds to nothing, really.
it builds to nothing.
Yeah.
Or the character, and I'm trying to figure out which one it is.
Is that Ari, Daniel Gravel, I believe it is, that has the nut allergy? He's the screenwriter, right?
Yes. But I was also thinking of the artist character. The gay artist.
Yes, yeah, Ezra. Spoiler alert, I guess. Spoilers. There's no, I guess. Spoilers here. But there comes a moment at the end of the film with him that, again, and like, the execution of the kill just left a lot to be desired. Like, I just didn't find it all that interesting. Yeah, I'll agree with that, because I felt like they did some playful things with him within the narrative that I was kind of
like,
hoping.
Comedically, I thought he was really good.
Yeah.
Like
the whole pepper spray attribute that they add to his character for much of the runtime, I actually think is utilized very playfully. So the fact that his death is so anticlimactic by comparison, I think, is kind of a bummer.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I just didn't find the kills here, at least, not all of them. Those two in particular, I didn't really care for. The one that did sort of work for me, that I did like, was Noelle. And again, she's the psychic goth character here.
Oh, her response to it.
Her response to getting stabbed was really funny.
What did she say? Good. She goes, finally, or something like that.
Like, she was anticipating it or wanting it, or I don't know, but like, it was really good. So,
I definitely got the sense that she was looking forward to it, just given her connection to the dead.
Exactly. So like, that one felt inspired. The rest of them, or a lot of the other ones, was like,
Yeah. Well, that's why I compared it to something like Hard Eyes from earlier this year, is that I think that's a film that was actually very successful as a romantic comedy, but not so much as a slasher. And I think this is kind of similar, although I think I had more fun overall with this one than I did Hard Eyes, because as much as I like the romantic chemistry of that film's two leads. That film I thought was a bit more frustrating given the fact that it is also more heavily reliant on its slasher thrills. This one is not. So I think it's able to get by more cleanly, if that makes sense.
That's a really good point, because the kills for Hard Eyes are a big part of the film, film, and the fear of it and what the characters experience there. Obviously, these characters are experiencing fear to some degree, but tonally the film is treating those kills just so differently. Yeah. So differently. And the kills being underwhelming here, I don't think is nearly it's not nearly as egregious in terms of the enjoyment factor. Yeah. I mean, I didn't really enjoy the film much as a slasher, but I had a hell of a time as this film working as a comedy and as an adolescent trying to move on from your childhood kind of thing.
It's a hell of a summer indeed.
Yeah. And also, Joaquin Phoenix Jr. just elevated it just a little bit for me.
He really is a terrific actor.
I love him. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Hell of a Summer. I enjoyed it.
Good stuff. Good stuff. I had fun as well.
I am looking forward. They may never reach the heights of the Apatow crowd, but I am curious to see Bryk and Wolfhard, Heschinger, where they go. If they keep working together, keep making movies together, I'd be curious. I'd be really curious to see where that goes for those guys. Yeah. I mean, to be only 23, 24 years old and to be given $3 million to make this movie, I mean, that's not nothing. It's not a crazy budget by any stretch of the imagination, but for anyone to even say yes to this, it's crazy. And it gets picked up by Neon. So
we need more mid-budget films like this, and this is not even a mid-budget film. This is a low-budget film. To call it a mid-budget film, I think is really not accurately describing it. What I'm trying to look at what it did box office wise.
1.8 million so far, but it wasn't a huge release. That was only I want to say like 1,100 theaters, if I'm not mistaken. It was less than 2,000, but I want to say like 1,100. So it wasn't a crazy amount. Hopefully this, is able to make that up over the next few weeks. And if not, maybe when it gets to VOD, it's able to finish making up that gap on digital.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
I could see this doing well during. Yeah, I could see this doing well in a VOD format, especially when it gets closer to the Halloween season. I can actually see this being kind of a cult-like film. I'm not saying it's going to be a cult classic or anything like that, but I feel like movies like this, comedic horror films, tend to be sought after around Halloween even more so nowadays than the traditional horror films. I just feel like there's an audience for these now.
Yeah, and look, for a silly horror comedy like this, it is very well composed and thoughtfully directed. There is like they don't just completely undermine cinematography, or as I noted earlier, the editing is such a big part of this film.
That's the other distinction I would make between this and something like Hard Eyes, is that there's actual craft to Hell of a Summer. Not to say it's certainly not one of the best looking movies of the year or anything like that, but by comparison to something like Hard Eyes, there's at least creativity here, and that goes a long way.
I agree. I mean, for $3 million, it looks pretty good. This will end up looking better than a lot of other films that have way bigger budgets this year.
Looking at you, Marvel.
It will. Just simply will. And that, so credit to these young guys for putting in the effort.
For honoring that.
Having fun. I think they did their best with the $3 million they had. And the film got picked up by Neon. And that's not nothing. Not nothing at all.
Neon's killing it. They're killing it right now.
Absolutely. Totally agree. All right. So that is Hell of a Summer. If you agree or disagree with anything we had to say, you can leave a comment below if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, reach out to us. Social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky. You can always email us in sessionfilm@gmail.com. We would love to know your thoughts on the film. What did you think of Joaquin Phoenix Jr.? I would love to know. I would love to know. All right. We have Another review coming out this week. We are going to be talking about the comedy, the action comedy Freaky Tales. Look forward to getting into that. Episode 631. It is available right now. We talk about CinemaCon. Had a great time getting through as much of it as we possibly could.
Yeah, which
we
was
weren't
like
able to get to
15% of it.
Yeah, there was a lot we left out of the conversation because we ran out of time. We didn't get to talk about Wicked at all. There's a new Ryan Gosling film that was announced that sounds kind of fun to me.
Project Hail Mary, is that the one you're thinking of? Project Hail Mary. It's based on a novel by Andy Weir, who also wrote The Martian, and apparently it's directed by Phil Lord and Chris Miller.
Well, there you go. Yeah, a lot to look forward to with that. So we didn't even get a chance to talk about those. I mean, we had so much to talk about. And of course, we continued our Best Picture movie series with A Man for All Seasons. So fun show, great show. Go and check that out. Make sure you stay tuned for Women in Session this week as well. I will be joining them for a conversation on this week's show. Look forward to getting that out. With that said, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast. Friday Heshinger. Walking
Hell of a summer indeed. And it'll be a hell
Cast
of a
them
fall.
together, please.